Oh. Hello and good evening, everybody, whoever is watching the stream. Um,
Uh,
Before we
Hi.
begin, tonight is the first day of, no, the day before the first day of Chinese New Year. Um, that means that in my recording area, or the studio, in my recording area, uh, they are lighting a lot of fireworks. So if you hear explosions on the background, assume that I'm in a war zone or something.
We are not under attack. We are just celebrating.
We're not under attack, we're just celebrating. So, with that out of the way, let's get properly started. Let's do our greeting, where we form our feet in an L, sword down, we raise our sword up,
Oh,
and we say
right.
the magic words. Grüß dich.
Grüß dich.
Grüß dich, everybody. And I hope that everybody is having a good evening tonight, uh, locally and internationally, and wherever you are from. And welcome to the Zwaardkring stream. We are in our fourth lesson today, and last lesson, in lesson 3, we discussed the basic defenses, and we looked at a technique. We looked at footwork, basic defenses, and we looked at a technique called Absetzen, which was a counter thrust. So today we'll be starting with a little bit of a revision on that, and then it's going to be actually quite a lot of talking and a lot of showing, because we're going to be discussing some concepts in historical European martial arts. We're going most notably distance and reach, as well as initiative. And if we have time left, and if I have energy left, I wanted to discuss the technique called Hangen today, which is something else. So, let's start with what we did last time. Last time, we started with the basic defenses against the basic attacks. I'm going to spend a little bit of time rehashing that, just so that we are all at the same page. And from there, we're going to move into a quick review of upsets and then follow on after that. So, yeah, the basic defenses. Ron, explain the basic defenses. What were they about?
Well, what do you mean what they're about? They're about just, putting your sword up, getting in the way, keeping the sword away from yourself.
Basically, yes. So there's a little bit more to it, but yeah, basically like that. We always said we started with the idea that in sword fighting, the first rule, most important rule, is that you keep yourself safe, and the basic defenses are the first tool into accomplishing that. They are solid defenses that you can use to protect yourself against incoming attacks. They are fast defenses. They cover the lines of attack really well. They don't leave ideal openings for counterattack, but at the same point, they don't leave any gaps either, any noticeable gaps anyway. So the basic defenses were like this. So remember the targets, the first cut is going to come to my neck. So I want to protect that. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take a step back. Basically, every move that we do is always accompanied by footwork and movement backwards or forwards. So when my opponent is out of reach, and we're going to be discussing reach a bit later, but when my opponent's out of reach and steps forwards to get into reach, I step backwards to step out of reach again. That way, my first defense is not being where the sword is. But I can't rely on that. I need to defend as well. So I put my sword in front. So Farhan, what are some notable points that you need to be keeping your eye on when you're putting your sword in front of you for your basic defense?
Well, you're going to do a basic defense. First of all, you're going to have to keep your sword nice and far from your body. Keeping it too close to your body makes you vulnerable to people who are very strong, who just smash through your defenses. But at the same time, you don't want to keep straight arms. You want to keep them slightly bent in kind of the Langenort I think Sasha will have to demonstrate this. You don't want to lock your elbows, basically.
So when you defend, I'll stand a little bit closer. You don't want to stretch your arms all the way out like this. This basically removes all the power that your muscles can generate. It has to do with angles of attachment and stuff like that. So what you want to do is you want to keep your arm bent so that your muscles can still generate force to counteract any force that's incoming. All right. What else?
The other thing you want to do is maintain proper structure. Generally, I don't think we talk about this much in class, but usually, hey, Sasha, why don't you come closer to the camera so people can see you better?
Closer.
Yeah. But basically, you want to turn your hips into the oncoming cut. This is actually generally why we take a step, is so that we can turn our body into the cut to better receive it. Because if Sasha was standing and he didn't step, and the attack came in from that same side, he would have to rotate his torso in a very uncomfortable manner. And then you can see that his arms are in a weird, awkward position. His sword's in a weird, awkward position. He cannot maintain the structure, and that's when a much stronger opponent will definitely 100% smash through him. Not to mention, if you don't step and you don't turn your hips into the attack, it's easier for people to use superior footwork to get around the angle of your sword.
Yeah, basically that. A few things that I would like to add is, yes, you keep your sword as far away, but not like you push your sword all the way down into a sort of quasi-cut where you attempt to cut down the sword. It's really just a defense, a block. So you want to keep the sword close to your center line, so that when I'm covering my left side and he switches his attack and comes over the right side, I can quickly shift from left to right. And this is one of the most common ways you will be attacked, is someone who goes like left, right. So you want to keep your sword close, not like cut your sword all the way down, so that if I have to shift my defense to the other side, I need to make this huge swing to get there. So ideally, I want to make a static block close to the body, well, as far away as I can, but close to the body. The way I do this is by keeping the tip above my head, forming what's a little bit of a roof on that. So as you can see, as I switch from defense to defense, left, right, I'm moving forward. I should be moving backwards so that you guys have a better look. So you'll see that I can shift, and the tip should stay relatively stationary, as opposed to, this would be wrong, where I defend here, defend there, defend here, and defend there, and you'll just see this is such a bigger movement. I see this so often of people who get attacked. They're like, ah, ah. They
one moment. My cat's trying to get into my room.
Okay. So they overcommit into a defense, and then you bite yourself in the rear, because you leave yourself far more open on the other side. So what you want to do is you want to cut off the line of attack with the defense while keeping your sword as far away from you, while keeping the tip straight above your head, here and here. So that's the 2, and those defenses 1 and 2 work against basically all cuts from above or from the mitral house, and they also work against the thrusts. I can push a thrust aside, and I can push a thrust aside. And again, especially against the thrust, I don't want to cut the sword down, because especially with the thrust, it's very easy just to pull back and attack another target. All right, thrust, pull back, attack another target. So you want to be able to quickly switch from left to right to defend yourself. Then the lower defenses.
I think we are talking about defending against thrust. There's another point to add then.
All right.
It's rather, we should also remember that you should defend against, especially against thrust, but generally applies to most attacks, is you want to defend with the strong of your blade rather than the weak of your blade. And we should
Okay.
probably go over strong and weak in a bit later, but
Yeah,
something
let's
to keep in
talk.
mind.
You know what? Let's be flexible and let's add the structure of the sword to today's class as well, because those things will come up. And I sort of assume that whoever is watching this is interested in HEMA enough that they sort of know the parts of the sword, but we can't assume, right?
Yeah, it's probably
Gotta be
something we should bring up as well.
got to be someone out there who doesn't know the parts of a sword. I'm talking to you, whoever you are. I see you.
Definitely me. I have no idea at all.
Yes.
This like strong, weak, fort, or what's the tip called?
You're just embarrassing yourself now, Farhan.
I have no idea.
So yeah, basically for all the attacks, but we also have attacks coming from below, and the same principle applies. Only now my sword is pointing down. So rather than my sword pointing up, I point my sword down here, and it's the same principle. My arms are as extended, my sword is as forward as possible. The tip, rather than now being directly above my head, is now directly below my head, so that when I switch from left to right, I can easily switch. Mind you, too often do I see HEMA students do this, where they are like, okay, I'm in Fumtak, I'm going to defend low. Okay, cut down. Okay, fine. All right, that's sort of necessary. You go from Fumtak and you cut down to this guard. And then what they do is, rather than just switching to the right, they bring their sword up again and then cut to the other side. So they defend like this, left and right. And that's such a huge waste of movement. You're already down there. The only thing you need to do is switch to the other side. Cuts from below aren't going to be so strong that you need to like swing in against them to be able to deflect them. So I can just left, right, left, right. And it also helps with switching from low to high. And just switch easily without needing to thrust. Without needing to like make a big cutting movement against my opponent's sword. There are techniques who do that, but those are not the basic defenses. All right, you want to keep yourself safe. This is your first step. All right, get this right, and you can do a lot to keep yourself safe already. All right, enough about the basic defenses. We did that last week in detail, so let's move on. We talked about footwork. We talked about forward steps, 1, 2, the ones that we normally do. These are, by the way, called passing steps. I'm not sure if we mentioned that last time.
We did, in response to one of the questions.
Right. So this is a passing step, and it's simply because one foot passes the other. And then we had the diagonal steps, which are called single steps, because my foot does not pass over one another. We have a little routine using the cross on the floor. I would be really impressed if anybody remembered that. Farhan didn't remember that.
I still don't remember that.
Still don't remember that. So, heck.
I mean, in my defense, I'm left-handed, so I start from the opposite side, and it gets very confusing.
Right. So we had the sideways steps, which were actually 2 steps in one. Farhan was very adamant that we say it's 1 step, but it's actually a 1-2 kind of move. Where something I didn't say last week about the sideways steps is that you can actually do them wrong. Important is if I, hold on, Ash, you need to get out of the way for a moment. Important to realize is that if this point, right, the crossing of is where my opponent is standing, and maybe I can indicate that somehow. This cross. So if this cross is where my opponent is standing, and I take a sideways step, it's actually possible to overstep with your second foot. So when I step sideways, too often I see that people like get this sort of like sideways step. I'm over exaggerating now, but that they're rear foot goes way too far that way. And like this, I am not overly stable. So what it's got to be is that you don't overstep. When I sideways step, right? So don't overstep towards my. In fact, my new orientation towards my enemy, right? Even though my enemy didn't move, I moved. Should be the same sword fighting stance that I always have with my left or right foot forward. So if I stand here and stand towards my enemy, and I sideways step 1, 2, then from here I have my normal sword fighting stance back. At worst, I am in a linear stance regarding my opponent. But when my foot crosses the line my front foot makes towards my opponent, then I lose stability. So here, not here. So if you need to like twist your hips in order to get somewhat comfortable, like twist your hips away from your opponent, then you're doing it wrong. When I sideways step, I don't need to twist my hip away from my opponent. Like this, now my hip is facing that way, not that way, towards my opponent. So don't overstep. Didn't say that last time. So yeah, it's about footwork. Passing steps, single steps, sideways steps. Generally, most techniques that we have use one of these 3 kinds of steps. All right, let's move to the last one. I got a little comment last week from one of my viewers that the Absetzen was tricky to see because the dummy was blocking the camera. So I'd like to do it with, he suggested that we move our camera so, we move the dummy so that I'm fighting towards the dummy away from the camera. So let's see if we can make that work. So Absetzen, while I set this up, you know what, while I set this up, Fran, why don't you explain Absetzen for a bit?
Absetzen, the one we did last week.
Yeah.
Yes. Setting off. It's basically a practice of setting off your opponent's attack to the side with your blade. It's a form of basic attack that's accompanied with a thrust. So whatever happens, you simply catch your opponent's blade on the strong of the sword here. Some people will try to do it fast and catch it on their crossguard, and they will try and you deliver a thrust.
Yes. So ideally, how I start the technique is I start from a position of onset, so where my tip is aimed at my opponent. Ideally, I start in the fluke, the discard, the fluke. I start at the fluke, and my opponent, I thrust at me. My opponent thrusts at me. So what I want to do is I want to switch to an ox. First, I want to sidestep, because I don't want to be in this line of attack. The line of attack goes straight towards me, so I don't want to be there, so I want to sidestep. Now the line of attack passes by, and I can stay safe and unharmed. Again, void the blade wherever you can. After that, I want to catch his sword while practicing Ansätze. Like Fran said, many people will try and catch it at the crossguard, but at the strong, it's really good enough. And then from there, I want to move into an ox, catching his sword, pushing it up like that. At this point, the tip of his sword is very close to my crossguard. And this will allow me, this gives me the leverage against him to push his sword aside and thrust in, in his chest and neck and face area. So let's hope that, Farhan, you're watching the stream?
Yep.
All right. See if this looks good.
Yeah, it looks fine. It looks fine. Perfectly well.
All right. Good. So yeah. Let me just reset our dummy here. Thrust. Okay. So yeah. From here, push it to the side, and then thrust at him. All right. So it's really a circular motion that is do. While my tip stays on my enemy, my sword, and I should do this sideways stepping, but my sword thrusts forward at my opponent. So from the fluke, go up. I usually explain this in, like, for practice, you can break it down in a few steps. For practice, let's see. Hold on. Reset the dummy. So for practice, what you first want to do is you first want to do the step. Oh, don't lose your arm now. Apologies. Oh, come on.
Just like the real Ash.
Just like the real Ash. Okay,
Whenever you want to
fine.
cooperate, he does something dumb.
Right. So, first step. Step one for doing the upsets in the correct way. Side step. Up. Right. This can go sideways because your opponent is coming in. You don't need to step forward in this way. But I need to step forward because, of course, the training dummy doesn't step forward. So, side step. All right. So that's his sword. Then from there, catch the sword. All right. While keeping your tip on your opponent. And from there, thrust forward into an ox. And during this whole routine, my tip should stay on my opponent. I should practice the onsets at all times. So, side step 1, catch, 2, thrust, 3. Bring your thrust as high as you can. As you notice, I end my thrust above my head. All right, so that my head is nice and safe for any shenanigans that Ash might do. All right, back in Bontak you go. So yeah, a counter thrust, and last time we also mentioned right towards the end, so I'll mention it a little bit earlier this time, it's perfect to do against cuts as well. Left and right cuts, so you can do it from left against a cut that is coming from here, and then you thrust in, or from the left, cuts coming from here. Cut, you can't do it against cuts from below, but any cut that comes from above works. It works better against cuts that against Oberhau, so the cut that comes from above, than against Mittelhau. But it's not impossible to do it against Mittelhau. Anything to add, Fran? Anything forgetting?
I wouldn't say it's impossible to do against cuts from below. It's just instead of switching to a high ox.
Well, then you get hangen. We're going to be discussing that.
Yes. It's technically either way ends in a hangen.
Yeah. Okay.
Whether it's up or lower hangen.
So, yeah, so that's what we did last week. And this week I wanted to analyze this upsetzen from a perspective of initiative and distance. We've touched upon distance before, but let's go into that a little deeper. What do you think, Fran? Distance or initiative first?
You know, I'm not partial to either.
Okay, fine. Right one. Initiative then. So, in German sword fighting, in HEMA, they define 3 kinds of initiative, right, in the Lichtenauer tradition. You have, and they go by German names, you have Vor, V-O-R, Nach, N-A-C-H, or Indes, I-N-D-E-S. So, Vor, Nach, Indes. Say this with me. Vor, Nach, Indes. One more time. Vor, Nach, Indes. All right, these are terms that are going to come up repeatedly throughout our classes. I've tried to avoid them as much as I can, but so, yeah. With vor, this is the German word for before, right? And that's not entirely accurate, but it does give you an idea of what it does. So with vor, initiative means I act. I do something my opponent needs to react to. So I take an action, and that can be anything. I can make an attack. I can simply advance forward. Or as long as I do a threatening action from where my opponent needs to give some sort of reaction to. This is best accompanied with presenting threat to my opponent. If I take initiative without presenting threat, then it's a free hit. So what do we mean by presenting threat? It's either ansetzen, so thrusting, or cutting. That's also fine. So usually it's an attack. That's vor. Means I take the initiative. I act first. Right? I do something, not my opponent. Nach is the opposite of that. Is my opponent acts and I have to react. Right? And that part is important. I have to react. If my opponent does something, but he doesn't require a reaction from me, like, oh, he steps backward. Yeah, okay, technically he's acting, but it doesn't require a reaction from me, so no initiative is necessary. But if my opponent attacks me with a cut, I need to react. One example of a nach action that we've already discussed are the basic defenses. Right? The basic defenses, I can do them only when my opponent attacks me. If I do them before my opponent attacks me, then he can clearly see what I'm doing, and then he can take the initiative with a different attack. So first,
defending before an attack doesn't even count as one of the 3 initiatives. It's just a really bad idea.
Yeah,
we don't even classify that.
Yeah. So my opponent attacks me. I step back. I defend. That's clearly nach. All right. So my opponent takes the initiative, and I have to react to his actions. If he thrusts, so being in nach is a definite state that you need to be mindful of, right? Because if my opponent attacks, and I'm like, I also attack, more often than not, I didn't realize I was nach. I thought my opponent had an opening or something, whatever, and I attacked him. We both attacked at the same time, and usually this results in a double hit, which is a clear violation of the first rule of sword fighting. Stay safe, right? Double hits are not acceptable because they mean that you got hit. Yeah, I got my enemy too. Who cares? You're dead.
You're reckless.
You're reckless. You're
defending
dead.
Yourself.
So important is that we realize when we are vor, or when we have the opportunity to be vor, and when we are nach. Right? If my opponent does something and I need to react to it, my first objective is to keep myself safe. Right? And that's why we start with the basic defense, because they're so good at keeping yourself safe. Is because this basic defense cuts off pretty much the entire left line of attack. And my opponent, that's one of 4 lines of attack. So if I place the right defense, my opponent needs to come up with a second or a third action. There's a third initiative, indes. Indes means in between, or as he is attacking. And it's basically nach and vor at the same time. My opponent is acting, yes. I am reacting, yes. But I'm also acting. One example of what we've already done. You know what? I'm going to give you guys 20 seconds to figure out what example I'm thinking of a technique that we've already done. And really, this is really easy because we've only done really one technique already.
I don't think there is anyone talking in the chat.
Doesn't matter. This is for you guys at YouTube. It's for you guys at YouTube who are watching this. You get this time to think about opzetten. It's opzetten. All right. So, is there anybody even watching this, Fran?
Yes.
Ah, fantastic. I appreciate you. Not you, Fran. The guy, the viewer. All right.
I feel so valued right now.
So, opzetten, right? The technique we just discussed is an indes technique. I get attacked. Yes, I get attacked. Somebody is thrusting at me. He is vor. But what I'm doing is, rather than simply reacting to his attack, I am also acting. So I'm pushing his sword away and thrusting in at the same time. So this acting and reacting kind of example is like I'm not only defending myself, I'm also attacking my opponent. That is indes. And Ringeck calls, I believe, indes the moment of opportunity. And arguably, indes is the best place to place an attack. And yet it isn't. We'll get to that in a bit. But, yeah. So we have vor, I act, I take the initiative, I attack first. We have nach, I receive an attack, and I defend against it. And we have indes. He attacks, I attacks, but because I attack better, I win. And if you remember from last class, or like 2 classes ago, we talked about the superior attack. Well, that's it. I defend myself and I attack at the same time in this superior attack. Mind you, you can also do a superior attack in vor. We will look at that way ahead when we start doing the Meisterhauen. But yeah, the superior attack. Vor, nach, and indes. Faan, anything to add?
I don't think I'm going to add anything at this moment until we reach superior attack and the Meisterhauen. Just
Sure.
going to leave it at that.
Yeah. So for initiative, just remember, vor is acting, nach is reacting, indes is acting while he is acting. And yeah, so indes is really also the danger zone because, like I said, if I attack with a simple cut and he attacks with a simple cut, and we both hit each other, then we're both dead. And that's like the least desirable result. Not that he dies, but that I'm dead. Right? Because of rule 1. So yeah, we've seen vor with the basic attacks, we've seen nach with the basic defenses, and we've seen a technique that we can do in indes, absetzen. Let's talk a little bit about distance, because last time there was a question about how should I step with indes, with absetzen. And so let's talk about distance. But before we do that, let's talk about the parts of a sword first, because I think to explain one, we'll need to explain the other first. Sword.
Mm-hmm.
Right? There's a few parts of this. Most of you will already know this, but I'm just going to go over them for those who are truly beginning with HEMA. The knob at the end of my sword is called the pommel. It serves as a counterweight as well as a place to hold on to. The part where I place my hands is called the hilt. This beam right here, this cross, if you will, is called the cross guard. Keep your hands safe. This one has this little bit over here. It's called a shield. Shield.
Just one thing I would like to point out before that the crossguard is composed of 2 quillons. Sometimes it comes up, sometimes it doesn't, but it's just helpful to remember that this as a whole is called crossguard, but each of these individual prongs is called a quillon.
Right. I don't believe that comes up in German longsword, but
it comes up for newbies because a lot of newbies like to put a finger over the quillon.
Like this.
And I spend a lot of time telling them not to do that.
Like this.
Because they think it looks cool. And
yeah,
then they break
the pistol
fingers.
Grip. Yeah, not just you break fingers, they get cut off.
Yeah.
Especially if you don't have a shield on your sword.
You can do it with some swords that have nice fingerings. You see it with arming swords sometimes, but please do not do it with longsword.
Hold on, I have examples.
Way to lose your hand.
I have examples. Okay, so this one. Yeah, come on. You can do it. Oh my god, I haven't used this in a long time. The leather is fucking molded. Apologies, sorry for the language. Okay, yeah. No mold, bad mold. Okay, so this is another trainer, waster for mine, blunt, and I haven't used this in a long time, but you can see this one doesn't have a shield. So yeah, you have swords with shields, especially the faders. They commonly come with shields. They're really nice because the shields give a little bit of extra protection when you do certain cuts that with blunt without a shield gets your fingers hit. And then I should also have an example of a sword with a fancy basket hilt, which you actually can and should hold in a pistol grip with your finger over the quillon. Ah, the old faithful rapier. Alright, so the rapier has a nice basket hilt over the top, and because it's a one-handed sword, the pistol grip or the finger over the quillon, like you see, this bit is the quillon, and then my finger goes over it. But I can only do this because I have a basket hilt on top that will protect it. If I wouldn't have a basket hilt on top, then I would very much hold my sword like this. But since it has, I can do this.
Yes, very important. Longsword, do not put your finger over the crossguard.
No. Do not do this. For the love of God. For the love of your hand, don't do this. Alright? So yeah, crossguard, hilt, pommel, shield. Let's talk about the blade. Alright? So the whole blade is actually divided up into 5 parts, some overlapping. You have the sort of from the middle to more or less the crossguard. This part is called the strong. This is the part that's closest to you. The second is this part, which is the weak. And the last part is the tip. All right, so you have strong, which is closest, weak, which is furthest, and then the tip, which is the very end. And then a sword has 2 sides. In some swords, they are different, but in some swords. So you have the lange sniet, or the long edge, and the kurze sniet, the short edge. So in sword fighting, so since this sword has 2 sides, the lange sniet is always the side that's facing away from you, the side where your knuckles are pointing. So if my knuckles are pointing that way, this side, the outside, is the lange sniet. The inside is the kurze sniet. Do I have a sword which I can demonstrate lange sniet and kurze sniet on? I do not. Ron, do you?
Not at hand at the moment.
Not at hand, okay. Well, that's what you get for improvised subject matter.
Yeah, but basically it's just the long and short edge. Lange sniet and kurze sniet is basically a holdover from curved swords where you get one side is sharpened, which is the long cutty side. So they would have one long cutty end, which is curved away, and that's the thing. And sometimes they would sharpen the back of the blunt edge, so it's like a little tiny, short, sharp piece, and that's why it's called the short edge, because it's an edge that's short.
Yes. So lange sniet and kurze sniet.
Yeah. I really need to buy a messer for this.
Yeah, messer you could display on your saber.
It's somewhere.
Yeah, that's somewhere. Okay, never mind. So yeah, those are the parts of a sword. I believe that the Italians subdivided even more, but this is all you need to know.
Oh, maybe we should also point out that the long and short edge also correspond to the true and false edge that you hear people use sometimes. It's interchangeable. It means more or less the same thing.
Yeah. So the true edge is the long edge or the lange sniet, and the false edge is the kurze sniet. Right. So it's the back of your sword. Heck, if you pay attention, you'll probably hear me make that mistake from time to time. Yes. Let's. I had something else to say about this. Strong and weak. An activity that you can do if you have a person, if you're not totally alone at home, if you have one other person, is to feel that, because they call it the strong edge, because the strong edge is where we have leverage. I am strong when the swords connect at the strong edge. If it's at my strong and his weak, I have superior leverage over him. What that means is that with relatively little strength, I can push his sword away. And my enemy can push as hard as they want, but if my sword is at their weak, they're not going to make a difference. One activity I usually do with this, and that's always to demonstrate, is what you can do is you can have somebody hold the sword, and you tell them, or hold the stick, because sticks also have the same. You can just simply tell them, like, okay, hold the stick, do not by any circumstance, let me move it. So you hold it, you grip it tight as you can, you point it forward, and do not let me push it aside. So you can try pushing it at the strong side, and you'll notice that you have to push with considerable force because they can push back. But if you take the short edge, what you can do is you can take your pinky and just easily move his sword aside. No matter how strong the guy is, I guarantee you, with your pinky, no matter how weak you are, I shouldn't make broad statements like this, but no matter how weak you are, you can, with your pinky, you can move the sword from left to right, however you want. And simply because you have when you hold the sword at the tip, you have a longer lever compared to the pivot point that is at the crossguard, or at least at the top hand. So it is a huge lever. Your opponent has a relatively short lever. That's the distance from his one hand to his other hand. So that's with this sword, it's maybe 30 centimeters, 20, 30 centimeters. So, and the sword is a meter, 10 centimeters long. So your lever is 4 times as long. So you need to exert 4 times less energy to still be able to move it. So yeah, that's why with the Absetzen, right, I want to catch his sword with my strong against his weak. I want to catch it with my strong against his weak. Then I can push his sword aside. If I catch his sword with my weak against his weak, I need to exert as much pressure as he exerts here. And you'll notice that you won't be able to practice Ansätze. When I thrust my sword, you will guarantee miss, right? Because it takes a very small amount of force to push that sword to the side. So what I want to do is I want to catch his sword at my strong with his weak. Then I can do whatever I want with his sword, and he is powerless to stop me, right? There's a defense. There's always a defense. Before you guys say, yeah, but what if he does this? There's always a defense. But not by pushing my sword aside. So catch with the strong and then thrust in. Don't catch with the weak. Also, if you catch with the weak edge, means you're too far apart. Speaking of too far apart, segue into distance.
Oh, that was a beautiful segue.
Right? I was particularly proud of that. So yeah, distance and range. Okay, so basically decided by 3 things, I would imagine. Distance and range. The first, so what we mean by distance or reach is how far can I effectively strike my opponent? And read this word very carefully. Effectively strike my opponent, right? Because I can strike my opponent a little bit further away, but then it won't be an effective attack. And I should go into my usual rant about how to measure if something is a good sword. All right, we're doing all sorts of segues today.
Let's do distances first, and then let's not worry about that one until the end.
Okay, sure. Bonus content, ladies and gentlemen. Bonus content today. So, distance. So it's how far can I effectively attack my opponent, right? So an easy way to measure your distance is to place your sword, hold your sword with one hand, or 2 if you wish, doesn't matter, and place your sword gently on your opponent's shoulder. This is the distance at which you can reach his shoulder. I can attack him a little bit further away, but instead of attacking his shoulder, I need to attack his hands. This is why I always tell you guys to keep your hands close to your body, by the way. Because if you don't, you're giving your opponent extra reach to attack you by attacking your hands. But if he is holding his sword forward, I can stand away. Observe here, I can't reach his face, but I can reach his arms, so he is within reach. And this reach is determined by 2 things. I said 3 things. Yes, the 3rd thing will come. Patient. 2 things. First is, of course, the length of my sword. The longer my sword is, the further I can hit with it. This is the whole idea with spears, right? If I have a spear, right, the whole idea is I have a nice long weapon, right, that my reach is nice and long. I can stab my opponent before he can stab me. This is perfect. If I outrange my opponent, then I win, right? I can stab him before he can stab me. That's the whole idea behind the spear. It's a sharp blade and a long stick so I can poke my enemy from far away. With the sword, somewhat in the middle, long sword, not great reach, but it's decent. And of course, if I have a dagger, I don't have a dagger ready. Alright, fine. If I have my fist.
I've got a parrying dagger here, but
okay. No.
these are really short.
If I do ye olde fisticuffs, alright, so if I have just my fists, my reach is really short. Right? As you can see, I have to step within. Hold yourself together, man. I have to step way within my opponent's reach before I can grab his arms. If I want to grab his arms, then that's fine. So I have to step within his reach. So with my in hand-to-hand combat, I don't have a lot of reach at all. So yes, reach determined by the length of your weapon. One. Second is determined by the length of your arm. Right? I'm a long guy. My reach is a little bit further than that of Farhan by virtue of having longer arms with which I can reach. But Sasha, you just said that if you put your arms forward, your opponent can attack them. Yes, but remember your initiatives. If I am in war, my opponent has to react to that. He first has to protect himself before he can attack me. Yes, there are attacks. Yes, the best cut, but we'll get there soon.
I think the point to make with the longer arms and longer reach is that if you have a longer reach, you can begin your attack earlier, which allows you to seize the initiative a lot more effectively or sooner than your opponent.
That is beautifully put. Yes, exactly. Exactly that. Because I have a little bit further reach means I can start my attack a little bit earlier. And the thing about reach is that it's a matter of centimeters. Like, you notice it. If you outrange your opponent by 5 centimeters, it makes so much difference. Because you can start your attack first. You will be vor. Ask Farhan. We have the same swords, but my arm is maybe like, what, 8 centimeters longer? Something like that.
Dude, you're like a foot taller than me.
Yeah, but my arm isn't a foot longer than you. Yours?
Close to it. Honestly, close to it.
Alright, anyway. You notice that reach is a measure of centimeters.
Away from me whenever I'm launching an attack. So that gives you so much advantage.
True.
And that gives much more reach in the initiative.
Yep. So, yeah. Reach. Lastly, and this is more likely why I can start my attacks earlier, because the static reach, the standing reach, is determined by the length of your sword and the length of your arm together. But this doesn't really happen in combat, because we can add one more thing. We don't start within reach. We start out of reach. A fight starts out of range. So we close until we figure, with a step and a cut, I can reach my opponent. With a step and a cut. So the size of your step and the length of your legs plays a huge part in when can I attack my opponent. Because observe, if I stand on the line with my front foot, I can reach my opponent. But I can start from all the way here. I think I'm almost out of the vision of the... But if I start from here, I can attack my opponent. Because I have, yeah, like Farhan said, I'm a foot taller than him. I'm a foot taller than most people here in Asia. And that means I can take a huge pace towards my opponent without losing balance, that my range is far longer because of that. So it's the size of your stride and pay close attention to what I said. The size of your stride without losing balance. I can step from further away. I can step from outside the range of camp, but what you get is like, right? And observe that I have to lean over forward in order to reach my opponent. This is less than ideal. So my reach is determined by the size of my stride from where I am balanced, right? From where I can cut without extending myself. If I have to take a huge step from where I have to overextend, then, and that's bad, and I should feel bad. So yeah, distance. Anything to add, Fran?
Nope, I think we covered most of it.
Right, yeah, so distance determines when you can attack, and this process, I should mention that, this process of finding out when you can attack is called finding your measure. As in, you have mentally measured the distance from you to your opponent, and you have decided, yes, now I can attack. And you read this a lot in especially later documents, not so much in Ringeck, but especially in later documents. They always talk about your measure, when you have found your measure, when you are in measure. So that's basically the distance, but also the moment at which you are attacked. For example, if I'm mid-step, I am not in measure, because from mid-step, I cannot attack. If I am in the wrong guard, right, I want to cut at him, but I'm in a low guard, then I am not in measure. First, I have to get to the right guard to get in measure. You are in measure when you are ready to attack. So usually that means from a balanced position, from the right guard, at the right distance, and your opponent isn't taking the initiative and stuff like that. So yeah, there is that.
And the last bit.
The last bit.
Do we want to go into this for reach, or do we want to move on to rest of initiative?
Sorry?
Do we want to finish up the rest of explaining reach, or do we want to move on to for the rest of initiatives?
Let's move on.
Sure, let's move on to the rest of initiatives.
Because the rest of the initiatives, Fran, there's only 3. I'm not sure what you're talking about.
No, I mean, we're talking about reach, right?
Yeah.
So there's one more thing that determines your reach.
Okay, go ahead.
Your target.
Yeah, of course. Stupid that I forgot that. Yes, because I've already said that if I attack the hands, or it's closer than the shoulder. But there's also one thing that you can have. Your reach is a circle around you. I'm not sure if I can demonstrate that on video, but if I extend my arm, if I attack a higher target, then that is my reach. If I attack, I don't know, a giant or something, I can extend that onwards. And you'll notice this, of course, the higher that up there, my reach is short, doesn't matter, because nobody is that tall. But down there, it definitely does. Because even though I'm within reach of my opponent's shoulder and his hands, I am not within reach of his feet or knees or waist. I am only within reach of his shoulder. And that's because of a fella, you might have heard of him in high school. His name was Pythagoras. Pythagoras says that the straight edge of a triangle, and you can imagine that my opponent is the far edge of a triangle. It has a name, but I keep forgetting it. And the straight edge is shorter than the diagonal edge. The diagonal edge to his knees is shorter than the straight edge towards his shoulders. So any high target, this is why we said with the low cuts, you got to attack a high target, because the high targets are physically closer to your body. So they are earlier within reach.
Oh, sorry. Cat.
Right? So I can demonstrate, right? We said that from this line, I am within reach, but if from this line I attack his legs, so yeah, I can swing what I like, but his legs are out of reach. So if I make a cut from below, I am not attacking his legs because his legs are so far. I'm not even attacking his waist. I am attacking shoulders, armpits, helmet if I can, underneath the helmet if I can finagle it. But not his knees. The same with high cuts. High cuts attack the high target as well, because if with high cuts I attack a low target, I need to be closer. Right? I can attack a low target, but observe that he can easily, I'm like far within his reach already. Whereas with the high cut, you'll notice that, yeah, I'm within his reach, but not that much. Right? So if I want to attack a low target, his knees, I need to get closer to him before I am in measure. But that also means that he will be in measure before I am. Right? He will be ready to attack. I will be within his reach before my intended target is within mine.
I think to illustrate, maybe give people an idea of just how much reach you're giving up. I'm 165 cm, about 5'5". Sasha's what, 210?
Dude, I'm 197.
Okay, around there. But
Oh,
he's so much taller than me, and if he goes for my legs, I can hit him in the head long before he gets to me. That's how much reach you give up. It's like 5 or 6 centimeters. That's his entire advantage.
It's like 15 to a foot.
Yeah, so he gets all that advantage when he's trying to attack my legs.
Yeah. So this is one of the things that I see a lot of beginners do wrong. They love to attack high and then low. They love to attack high, and they're like, ha, okay, I attack high, and then I attack your legs. They take a step forward. But what they don't see is that they practically run into their opponent's sword. So they attack high, there's a high defense, and then they attack low, and they need to get really close to the below, and the opponent can just do bonk and attack them in their face. And I have, and students have complained, dude, why did you hit me so hard in the face? It's like, I could. I did that because I could. She gave me that opportunity.
I mean, protect your head. It's where all
protect your head. Don't attack the legs unless you have a very good reason to. Which brings me to the next part. Okay, so with reach, I talked about effective reach. Not your entire sword is effective reach. All right. Talking a little bit about physics, a pendulum, if you will, if you consider your sword a pendulum, right, moves fastest at the tip, right? This part doesn't move so fast. The strong of your sword doesn't move so fast. The tip, however, moves really fast. And bringing in some physics, force is mass times acceleration. The faster something moves, the more acceleration it will impart on the opponent. So by that reasoning, the fastest part of your sword hits the hardest, right? So you will want to hit with the tip of your sword. There's another reason for this. I won't get into it right now, but the effective cutting part of my sword, the effective chopping bit, if you will, is about the top foot. Let's call it the top foot of your sword. Anything below that deals progressively less damage to the point where a gambeson or something can catch the blade. Like if you can catch it up here and you're wearing some thick padded cloth, then the sword can't cut through that instantly. It's actually how you can catch swords. So, provided you have at least some measure, it can still cut flesh. But yeah, so the top part of my sword. But now imagine I have bound my enemy and we have closed and we're in this position where we're really close apart. And I don't know, for some reason, maybe I push his sword aside, or I free my sword, I grab his hands or something like that, and I want to cut him with my strong. Not all that effective. What you then got to do is you got to make some sort of draw cut or push cut motion to actually get any cutting done. But then, hey, but hold on, the legs are further away. So that is within the effective cutting part of my sword. So then I can cut his legs from the side and his arms give up. Or I can maybe make a sort of sidewards cut on his arm where I hit my opponent with the fast bit of my sword. Mind you, this is for cuts, not for, this is for chopping motions, not so much for cuts, like push cuts or draw cuts, nor is it for thrusts. But that's the effective chopping part of your sword. You're strong, not that effective, and any measure of armor can prevent damage from that. This is the damage, and that's basically one of the advantages that you have with shorter weapons, is that cutting, the effective cutting part of the sword is closer to you. So what you can actually do, and this is most notably with spears, right? So let's see if I can brace a spear somewhere. I bet I can. Can you just like lean it on there? There we go. All right, so especially with spears, yes, they have a very effective reach, and the top foot is very dangerous. But once I'm past that tip, right, past the cutting bit, the rest of the shaft is relatively harmless. Like, yeah, you can do quarterstaff techniques with that, but if he thrusts at me with maximum reach, I'm already past that. I can just grab his sword and then attack him with my effective reach because my weapon is shorter. So you can actually step within someone's effective reach to get out of their effective reach. You can be safe really far away from your opponent, and you can be safe really close to your opponent, depending on the weapon they have. If they have a dagger, don't try this. A dagger is dangerous at any part that it can reach. All right, but if he has a sword, you can be so close that his sword becomes effectively useless. If he has a spear, that's especially one of the things that you got to do. You got to parry the tip and then get to the point where he can't do that much for you. Is this difficult to do? Oh yeah. Again, pardon my language. It is extremely difficult to get past the effective reach of an experienced fighter, right? Because he will be aware of this point. He will want to keep you within that effective reach area, and he will change use of his weapon based on where you are. But it's not impossible. One of my favorite techniques relies on stepping into effective reach of your enemy. So, yeah. And even if you're not within effective reach of, say, the shoulder, because if you notice I'm too close, the legs, because they're further away, are within effective reach. Something to consider.
Okay, let's move on. Let's continue.
Oh, actually, we need to stay at distance one more thing. Because we haven't actually discussed how we identify distances, right? The distance numbers. All right, so in the fight... We
haven't even started at that.
No, we haven't even started, but that does need to be covered with distance. So in a fight, I want to say Ringeck, but I only dare to say we at the Zwaardkring define 3 distances towards our opponent, right? The first distance is where the fight begins. This is, it's called, Fran, give me the German names.
Zufechten.
Zufechten, right? Fighting towards my opponent, right? I start at out of range. And this is whatever weapon I have, I start out of range, which means I need to move towards my opponent before I can attack, right? Zufechten. And I can do this with a cut, accompanied with a cut. But before that step, I am out of range. Then I am within range without needing to move forward. Farhan, name?
That is the Krieg.
That is the Krieg. Right. I always forget these names, so I'm asking Farhan. So yeah, the Krieg or the war. So at this point, I'm within, or my opponent is within my effective reach, and I can make lateral steps, sideways steps, and he can stay within my range, right? And when I get too close, this one I know, it is called ringen, or wrestling, right? At this point, my sword is less than useful, right? I'm not saying it's useless. There are definitely things I can do with my sword. I can half sword it. I can pummel someone in the face, or with the cross guard, like underneath the helmet, or push with the sharp of the sword. There's a lot of things I can do with the sword, but I can't effectively chop with it or cut with it. So now we come to wrestling range. So Zuvechten, Krieg, Ringen. 3 ranges at which the fight can happen. And at each of the 3 ranges, we see different techniques with different outcomes. We call them distance 1, 2, 3. 1 is where we begin, 3 is too close. And I like to call them too far, just right, and too close. Like a little bit like Goldilocks. Like Goldilocks was at distance 1. That was too far. Then Goldilocks was at distance 3. That was too close. Then she was at distance 2, which was just right. Right.
I'd like to point out that in the manuals, these 3 distances, the 3 distances are not explicitly spelled out.
Yeah, that's
but
what I
rather they are
thought.
implied throughout the text of where you should be and what you should do in each of these situations.
Yeah.
The Zufechten is always saying, when I engage in the fight, the techniques always start when you are in Zufechten. So it's presumed I am out of distance, I'm sneaking into distance to begin my attack. The Krieg is usually, it's just mentioned, oh, when you're in the Krieg, you can do your techniques. So it's assumed, it's implied that in the Krieg, I'm here where I can do all my techniques. The distance of the Ringen is never mentioned. It's not mentioned in the longsword text, but it's implied that you are going to Ringen because you are now too close to use your sword. So this is not spelled out.
You're within grabbing reach.
Yes. The section on wrestling with the sword, Ringen Amschritt, that depends. You get some of it in Ringeck's text. You get a lot of it in Talhofer's text.
Oh yes, like 60% of them is ringen.
Yeah. But a lot of techniques that come from that range come not in the longsword section, but the harness section, the armored fighting sections.
True. Talhofer also has some techniques which simply start with a plate where the sword is drawn like somewhere off to the side, and then you see one picture where they're already grappling, and that's when Talhofer says like, okay, in this situation do this. It's like, how did I get into that situation? Why is my sword off to the side? Nobody knows.
Talhofer's plates have a habit of starting in Zufechten, skipping the Krieg, and immediately proceeding to Ringen.
Yes, which is hilarious because you get some fun interpretations like, okay, I think this happened before that time, which is why your sword is off to the side. And
why your sword's behind him?
Exactly.
On the ground.
So
yeah,
hilarious.
Okay, let's wrap that up. Do you have anything else to say about the?
No,
distances?
With the 3 distances, I'm good. I've had my fill.
Do you want to talk about an exercise people can do at home?
Yes.
Practice their distances.
Practice distances. Okay, sure. You had a fun one that you talked to me earlier about. So what was that about?
This was actually how I started learning how to fence. Because when we showed up, I always showed up early, and sometimes people went around. So what I would do is I would find a wall, I would find a pillar or something, And I would simply try to figure out how far away I needed to stand before I could hit the pillar or the wall. So, I measure my distance, how Sasha normally measures his distance on a target, and then I take one step back and I'd swing. Then I'd take half a step back and see if I still could reach it with a step. And you keep doing this until you have the muscle memory of this is how far I need to be to hit my target effectively. Because no matter what happens, you own your sword and you cannot change your reach no matter how much you try. So if you know how far you can hit with your sword, you will always be able to find your measure. And this is just an exercise in being able to find your own measure in reaching your opponent and knowing, hey, I can hit him now. The thing that you come to realize is even when you're moving around, you will always be able to know how far away something needs to be before you can hit it. If you don't have a sword, you can always use your hands. And when you buy a sword, then you can get it. But it's just less effective because...
Or you can use a stick.
Yes, you can use a stick.
Right? I don't need to...
But we do have a stick there.
I don't need to have some fancy sword to be able to okay, fine. Here. So yeah. But especially you get a bit of an idea of how big your steps need to be. Now, one thing I would like to add to this exercise is when am I stepping too far? And basically that happens when you have to lean through your front leg and stretch all the way far. Then you're stepping too far. The official measure of this that I was always taught is that your knee passes the tip of your toes, right? But to be honest, I've always found that I will feel it before, I'm measuring, okay, can I still see my toes? The idea is that if I lean forward across my toes, it's at the point where I can't see my toes anymore, that's when I've gone too far. So my foot is facing forward, and as long as I can see my toes, I haven't overstepped. But you will notice if you try to do this exercise, and after every cut, say I'm cutting from my right shoulder, and I'm cutting after every cut, I want to take a step to the left, right? And as soon as I stop being able to do that, so I have attacked so far forward, and then I can't really quickly step to the left anymore, or my step to the left is very disorganized, then I have overstepped, right? Because if I cut and I can quickly step to the left, then I'm golden. Step to the left. But if I overextend, my step to the left is just slow and sluggish, and I have to, you noticed, I was stepping to the left, I had to compensate with several steps. That's when I'm overextending myself. So after each attack, bump, step to the left, see if I can bump, step to the left. So you approach, now I'm good, bump, step to the left, and then I'm golden.
I think one thing the easiest way, especially if you're doing it at home and you're not wearing shoes, is when you start dragging your back foot.
Yes, yeah.
You will be able to feel it across your floor after a while, and it
True.
will be a reminder to stop doing that.
True.
Because if you're dragging your back foot along with you, that means you're stepping a bit too far, and you're taking too big a step.
Yeah.
It's not so much that your initial attack won't hit, but rather it becomes more difficult for you to do follow-up.
Yes, because you've displaced your balance thusly that you have lost the ability to quickly maneuver around your opponent.
If you're using a stick because you don't own a sword, try to find a stick that kind of has the same length of the sword you intend to buy or you would like to own, because the weakness of this using a stick is that if you keep using a stick, you will learn to find your measure with the length of a stick.
Yeah, this stick would be awful if I were to buy this sword after, because the stick is...
No, that would be perfect.
Is it though? Is it?
It's about roughly the same length.
5 centimeters. Did we not say at the start that...
Oh, this is bad.
distance is
It's very bad.
it's about 5 centimeters like difference.
Yeah. So
That's the difference between hitting someone with the maximum reach of your effective attack and then, you know, if I compare it to my fader, that's not even funny
yeah.
anymore. It's like half a foot shorter than my fader.
Yeah. So that's the thing that you want to keep in mind. It's fine to use a stick. Just get a stick that's roughly the length of what you intend to buy.
Yeah,
If it's off by a few centimeters, that's kind of okay because
by a few
adjusting
centimeters,
later for a few centimeters is
manageable.
fine. Trying to adjust for like a foot difference later it's a freaking nightmare.
I mean, it's gonna take you some time to adjust. Like, honestly, by this time, after a certain point, you should get a feeling for the distance of your sword, and pick up a different sword, you should, you know, quickly get a feeling for the distance of that sword as well.
Yeah. Okay. Right. We've been at this for over an hour now.
Oh dang! Time flies.
Yeah.
Tempus fugit. All right.
Yes. But we do have a question or two.
Okay, questions. I love questions. Audience interaction. Hit me. No, yeah, you're too far away, but hit me with a question. That's okay.
So the first one is he wants to explain the point of percussion.
He wants me to explain the point of percussion, or he wants to explain the point of percussion?
He wants you to explain it. He wants to know what you meant by it.
Fine. Okay. Okay, bonus content. We're going to go an extra 20 minutes because this takes
We're going to go a bit longer. He's got 2 questions.
Oh, man. Okay, so there is this scene in Pirates of the Caribbean. Right early in the movie, we see Will Smith for the first time. He's bringing a sword to the commandant.
No, isn't that what's his name? That's not Will Smith.
Yeah, he's bringing it to the governor, but the governor intends to give it to the commandant, and he draws it, and then he's like, "This sword, it's perfectly balanced." Oh, a little bit of fireworks going on in the background. It's like 2 houses over. You should be able to see it on the laptop.
Oh yeah, that's brilliant.
Hi. Sometimes. I'm sure there's going to be more, but I'm going to take this moment of silence to talk. So he draws the sword and he lays it on his hand and he says, the point of balance is perfectly underneath the cross guard. And I would like to say that this point of balance is like the 4th thing you should look at when you're looking to buy a sword. There are 3 things.
No, Sasha, he's looking at point of percussion, not point of balance.
Yeah, I know. This is just to explain. The point of balance is what a lot of people say, like, this is what you should be looking at when you're buying a sword, but it's not. Balance is only 4th important, and balance can actually change a lot, because if the balance is under your crossguard, you actually lose a bit of striking power. The first thing you want to look at when you're buying a sword is point of percussion. It's so much more important than the point of balance. So what is the point of percussion? Well, every sword has 2 points of percussion. One should be somewhere in the crossguard, and one should be about hand's width down from the tip. And how do you find this point of percussion? Well, it's easy. You apply some percussion on the sword, and where it doesn't vibrate, that's your point of percussion. I'm really not sure if I'm going to be able to show this on this low-tech 24 frames per second camera, but so you strike the sword, and you should see that there's one point that's not vibrating. Right, that's here. And as you'll notice, when I said, oh, it should be a hand's width down from the sword, this is another hand's width down. This fader doesn't have an ideal point of percussion, but since this is a training weapon, that's okay. So this point of percussion, this stable point, that's the point where all your energy goes into whatever you're hitting with it. You can actually feel this. If you tap your sword on your hand and you start at the strong and you slowly move towards the tip, you'll notice that the blade vibrates when you hit it. You can feel it in the sword that you're holding. Up to the point where the point of percussion. And then you'll find that the sword becomes from vibrating to solid. And then as you continue onwards, it starts vibrating again. So this is the point of percussion. And that point of percussion, basically, if I hit my opponent with any point that is not the point of percussion, part of the energy that is in my swing will go into vibrating the sword. My cut is less efficient. So this can be a lot, like a lot. 20, 30%, less power in your cut. But if you strike with the point of percussion, I would say a lot less to almost no energy is wasted into vibrating the sword. And instead, all the energy is going into your opponent, which is where you want that energy to be. So the point of percussion is the most important thing. That has to be in the effective striking area of your sword, about a hand down. Like if we're talking two-handed swords, long swords, about a hand down from the tip. This is where I want my point of percussion to be if I were to buying a real sword. Sure, with stiffer swords, it becomes less important. This sword is very flexible, and it's because it's supposed to be when I trust someone. But all swords have that. And that's what I want out of a sword. As much of my energy into that cut, into my opponent. But I said fourth, the balance was the fourth most important measure. What are the other two? So the first is what are the other three? So the first is the percussion point. The second is the rotation point. There's two rotation points, one at the pommel and one at the crossguard. The rotation point at the crossguard should be at the tip. And what I mean by that is that if I hold my sword with two fingers at the crossguard, at the blade, and I make circles, then the tip should be stationary. And I don't know, can you see this?
Keep it in front of your shirt.
Yeah, I'll keep it in front of my shirt. So as I rotate,
stand behind the point, because it's a bit hard to see on the cement.
Yeah.
It's easier to see on the black.
So as you see this, as I rotate my sword, the tip is relatively stable. That's actually really good. This Reginier has an excellent point of rotation at the crossguard. And that is so that in the ox, when I shift to fluke and back, that's when I use that point of rotation. And that's really great for my ansetzen, for keeping my tip. Some swords, that is, for example, this one has a pretty poor point of rotation. As you can see, goodness, it's one of the long ones again. The tip goes everywhere. And that means that when I rotate my tip, when I rotate my sword, I need to compensate for the tip not staying at the same place. These swords have the same thing. See, this rotation point is all the way up, halfway up the blade. So that means that when I rotate, the tip refuses to stay on target. The tip just goes wherever, and I really need to compensate. I need to be deliberate about my movement. It's not easy, it's not automatic to keep the tip on my target. The last one is the rotation point at the pommel. I should take the Reginier to begin with. So same as with the crossguard, I hold with two fingers at the pommel, and I hold it at here. And you want this rotation point to be at somewhere in the middle of the blade. And you'll notice with the Reginier, it's not. It's at the crossguard. And so you want this to be somewhere halfway down your blade. And that rotation point is for techniques like duplieren and moutieren. Let me see if I can put my dummy up so I can demonstrate. These two techniques rely on rotating around the blade of your opponent. So if your opponent is standing in some sort of static defense, and I attack here, then I want to be able to rotate around to hit him in the face. This is called duplieren. A sword, which has a rotation point, a pommel rotation point that's at the middle does this almost automatically. And again, since this sword doesn't, I need to compensate a lot with my muscles. It costs me more energy to do that technique. Whereas this one, I believe, does that a lot better. Yeah, see, this one rotates it around here, which is better than at the crossguard for the other sword. So this one, if I rotate with there, it goes almost automatically where I can go around. So much easier than with the Regenier. And then we get the point of balance. Like, okay, if all those 3 points are correct, if all those 3 metrics are correct of a good sword, then you get the point of balance, which is a trade-off between maneuverability of the sword and striking power. If your balance is slightly above the crossguard, you get a bit more striking power at the cost of a bit of maneuverability. But if it's right on the crossguard, then you get more maneuverability at the cost of striking power. So that's just a trade-off for what you want. But the other 3 metrics, the percussion points and the 2 rotation points, they directly affect how effective certain techniques are going to be. Ansetzen is easier to do with, and Ansetzen, and as a result of that, Absetzen, techniques like Absetzen, winding, and that sort of stuff, it's going to be a lot harder with a sword that refuses to stay on target. Alternatively, with, and I can't off the top of my head tell any techniques that would benefit from the rotation points not being. You lose range if you lose reach if your percussion point is further down the sword than it needs to be, because you'll need to be closer to the enemy to strike at full power.
There is one time when you would benefit from a percussion point being further down the sword.
Shoot, go.
And that's for training.
Yes,
because if my percussion point is further to the end, I can hit people with less force and I can keep them safe.
Yes.
And that's why the Regenier has such a percussion point that's so much further towards the middle of the blade.
Probably, yeah. Probably.
This is why, remember, we don't want to hurt each other. So that's why the percussion point on that sword is so far down. And it's why we can do our techniques safely without hurting people too much.
Yeah, fair. So, so that's the 3 metrics I would rate as more important than the balance of your sword. Percussion point, rotation point at the crossguard, and rotation point at the pommel. Because, those are just important for a number of techniques that we do in Lichtenauer. So when you buy a sword, like if you can go to the store and you can actually test these measures out, then that's what I would look for. Especially with 2-handed swords. With 1-handed swords, there's a lot more leeway. The rotation point at the pommel, for example, is less important. However, the rotation point at the crossguard is important. And then, percussion point, like I said. Fran is correct, though. For training swords, the percussion point doesn't matter much. But in real swords, I want a percussion point that's, like I said, a hand's width down from the tip, so that I can...
especially if you're buying a sword for cutting purposes. For test cutting, then you want something with a percussion point at the correct height, or the most suitable height for you.
Yeah.
Either way, I think we should wrap this up. We've been going for an hour and a half already.
All right, fine. Let's wrap this up. So, for this week, we have 2 exercises that you can do. One is you can test the strong and the weak of your sword with a friend or family member. Just have them hold the sword and you push at different places to see the difference it makes. I recommend strongly that you do it because it really gives you a feeling of what it makes. Later, when we discuss certain techniques, there's always like, it's not working. And I'm like, yeah, because your strong isn't against his weak, or your weak isn't against his strong. Like, that's why this technique is not working. So understand strong and weak. Experiment with it. Look at it. See if you can work with it. All right. Then distance practice. Yes. get a stick that is of suitable length. You can look at websites. They usually have the length of the sword from pommel to tip, and then you can get a stick of suitable length and then practice so that you get familiar with your reach with that stick, with that sword. Start with that, and continue on from there. Do mind what I said with effective reach. It's not where you hit with the tip, it's where you hit with about a hand's width down, right? So you don't want to hit targets with the tip and say, oh, that's my reach. No, about a hand's width down, hand's length down. That's where you need to hit your target. Right? That's the effective striking point of your sword. So that's where I want to hit.
You're using a stick. You don't have a percussion point, so you might as well put like a piece of tape to mark where you're trying to aim for.
Yeah, a hand's length down. Put a piece of tape there. Like, okay, that's where I want to hit. Because if this was a sword, that's where the effective cutting point would be. All right.
Okay, cool.
Cool. I think we discussed a lot today, a lot of theoretical stuff. I didn't get to do my Hangen, but I guess we'll push that to next time. Thank you all for joining me in the stream. And I'll see you guys
don't forget,
next time.
Don't forget, Happy Chinese New Year, everyone.
Yeah, Happy Chinese New Year, everyone.
All right. Thanks for dropping by. We'll see you all next week.